In the letter that I received from Edward, he talked, as he did now, about involving our own biographical experience in terms of the topic. And the topic, of course, is news media and the war on terror. When I got the letter, I started to think that this sounded a bit familiar, and started digging through a few old papers, and I came across a speech that I had given 3 years ago, the response of Canadian news media to the war on terrorism, which is pretty close to the topic today. So, like any good journalist, I'm never going to miss an opportunity to recycle a little bit. And I started out that speech which was delivered in Budapest, Hungary, in February 2003, at a conference on the role of the media in public scrutiny and democratic oversight of the security sector. And in that conference, we were also asked, the prospectus for that conference, we were asked to reflect his or her personal area of experience and expertise. So I discovered that that's what I had done, in fact, and the first 3 or 4 pages of my text were very biographical. And so I think I'm going to read them now now that I've given you the context. And I think they probably serve as a way of getting into the discussion anyway. So to begin with, I think that I can reasonably present myself as a fairly typical Canadian. This was to an audience of Hungarians and other nationalities. And secondarily, I would argue that the Canadian experience is particularly relevant in this post-9/11 era. Let me explain. Since that fateful date, all of us have become more conscious of living in a world dominated by a single great power, the United States. This has never happened before. There have been many vast empires in the past in the world, but none that achieved global domination. All of us are now being dragged along in the wake of this Leviathan. And the number one question for every country today outside the United States, and that would be true now as it was 3 years ago, I think, is how to cope with this, how to retain some measure of independence, influence, and control over our own destinies and our common global future. How to coexist with a giant power in a world that has become one neighborhood. Well, we in Canada historically have been very good at doing just that. Keep in mind again, I'm talking to Europeans. We're the mouse that has not only learned to survive with the elephant at close quarters, but to flourish, and in some respects to outdo the elephant. I'll explain exactly what I mean in a moment, but not before I presented my credentials as a Canadian spokesperson. I am a quite typical Canadian ethnic mixture. 1/4 French Canadian, 1/4 American Canadian, and 1/2 Scots Canadian. In an ethnic sense, I'm very representative of what you might call the old Canada, the founding partnership of French and English-speaking Canadians that laid the basis of the multicultural country that we have become during my own lifetime. This founding partnership was brilliantly successful on the whole. We don't usually brag about it because the Americans are always within earshot. But we are perhaps the only country in the world to have successfully withstood and ultimately defeated an aggressive American invasion. The jury is still out on Iraq. In typically modest Canadian fashion, we refer to this monumental achievement only as the War of 1812. Most Americans and quite a few Canadians have never heard of it. Quibblers might argue that we weren't really a country at that time, but merely a British colony. But we knew then, and still know, that it was primarily our French and English-speaking forefathers who joined together to defeat the Americans, with significant help, of course, from the British and from our Indian brothers, whom we still haven't properly repaid. The Americans invaded us because we were part of the British Empire, their axis of evil of the day. They wanted to control the entire North American continent. We knew what they were up to, and we didn't want any part of it. The threat didn't end in 1812. After the distraction of the Civil War, the Americans started to look north again. They called this manifest destiny. This time, instead of invading, they let the Fenians do it for them. The Fenians were Irish terrorists, a little like the Al-Qaeda of today, who infiltrated into the United States in order to annoy Britain by attacking Canada. The United States was quite happy on that occasion to provide a haven for terrorist Fenian cells preparing to attack the Canadian territories of the British Empire. And then I went on and on and on and on.